Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Kroger. We're happy to have you with us. A lot on today's show. Jeff Sentell, we'll talk some UGA recruiting with him. Interesting stuff coming out of his visit to Arizona, including some new information about Duce Robinson's recruitment. We'll talk about that on the show. A former Georgia player said something really fun. UGA fans having a good time with this, and we'll kind of do our own part there on that. And I'm going to begin the show today with what I think is maybe the most underrated topic for Georgia here this offseason, something that probably hasn't gotten enough attention. We're going to do our part to give that some attention on today's show. I am looking forward to that. I'll also tell you this. I know we've had a couple of these days here as of late. We're not going to be able to go super long with comments today. I'm going to try to sneak out of here. I got a lunch that I want to be a part of, so I'm going to kind of bounce out of here and try to do that. We'll do some comments, just can't do a ton. We've also done the last couple of days. I think we've gone pretty long last couple of days. So hopefully we've done right by you on our R.S. Andrews cool down comments at the end of the show. But a lot of news to get to, some of it from the SEC there as well. We'll try to cover all of the bases. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
An announcement to make off the top here on the show. I think for the first time in several days, if I'm looking at our rundown here, and also assuming that something doesn't happen during the show, I think for the first time in several days, we will not mention Todd Monken's name on today's show. Not a expected topic here today, so we'll see if it stays quiet on the Monken front. We've had a lot the last several days about the twists and turns of Monken possibly going to the NFL, but nothing for you on that today unless something actually happens on that front as we are in the midst of doing our show. And as far as what we will talk about, obviously a bunch of different stuff today, kind of like it was yesterday. And this is that kind of time of year where sometimes just sort of a thought pops in my head and I end up bringing it to the show. It's like one of those things that just kind of sort of surfaces in your mind. And I guess an example of that to kind of begin this particular Friday here is I think there is a storyline for Georgia for this upcoming season that I don't think we've quite yet talked enough about. And for me, that's the return for this upcoming year for wide receiver Ladd McConkey. I want to make a quick comparison here for a moment. Obviously, when Georgia wide receiver A.D. Mitchell made the decision to transfer and go to Texas, that got lots of attention, and it's easy to understand why it would. Mitchell had become a fan favorite because of the postseason success he had in 2021, the great catch against Alabama, the game-winning catch against Ohio State this year. So Mitchell was a high-profile Georgia player, and as I said, a true fan favorite amongst Dog Nation. So when a guy like that leaves, it's going to get some attention. But I think what became a little bit problematic when you kind of go back and look at it is the Mitchell thing got so much attention, generated so much discussion, that I believe it sort of obscured the fact that around that same time, Ladd McConkey, the Georgia wide receiver, who actually had more production than what A.D. Mitchell has had, part of that because of the Mitchell injury, but nonetheless, Ladd McConkey made the decision around that same time to forego a chance for now to go to the NFL draft, to come back to Georgia for this 2023 season. And I do believe this is a situation where Georgia fans' interest and gratitude about having McConkey back should be at least equal to, if not greater than, whatever concern they may have, frustration they may have about the fact that a guy like Mitchell is leaving. And I want to make the case for you on that here for a couple of seconds here to try to sort of make my case for why McConkey coming back is a really big deal. First of all, statistically speaking, you may be aware of this, that there's only one player in the Kirby Smart era who's ever returned back to Georgia with more receiving yards in the previous year than what McConkey brings back as he returns for 2023. McConkey last year had 762 yards receiving. That's like the third most receiving yards anybody's had in the Kirby Smart era. First of all, that's impressive enough. But it's only Brock Bowers who's ever returned back to Georgia after having a season prior to that in which he had more receiving yards. Bowers came back this past year after having 882 yards in 2021. Obviously, he comes back for 2023 after having 942 yards this past season. So Brock Bowers, in terms of a returning productivity guy, has obviously exceeded what Ladd McConkey's brought to the table. But nobody other than that, not even George Pickens, by the way, has ever brought back more returning production, brought back more receiving yards than what McConkey brings back when he returns here for this upcoming year. In fact, that kind of success in 2022, coming back for 2023, has, if it has not always gotten enough attention from Georgia fans, has at least gotten a little bit more attention from some of the national media types or those sort of analytics-minded types. I was noticing the other day that Pro Football Focus, putting out its list of top 10 returning wide receivers for the upcoming season, McConkey's on this list. I think he's 7th or something like that. This is what Pro Football Focus said about Ladd McConkey here. He says this year, the redshirt sophomore was the 7th most valuable receiver in the country, according to PFF's win above average metric. He's got 42 combined receiving first downs and touchdowns, trailed only Malik Neighbors among SEC wide receivers in that category. He also had 178 rushing yards over the past 2 seasons, which ranks 4th for Power 5 wide receivers. Once again, this is Pro Football Focus. Now, leave that up on the screen if you don't mind for a second. Because I'll be the first to tell you, I have no idea what wins above average metric is. I don't have any idea what that is or what that means. That's probably beyond my ability to explain. But what's not beyond my ability to explain is 42 catches that were either touchdowns or first downs. A guy that moves the chains or rings the scoreboard for you, that's a pretty big deal, and McConkey did that a total of 42 times a year ago. You better believe having that coming back amongst his 762 receiving yards, the fact that so many of those catches went for first downs or touchdowns, that is a very big deal. So Pro Football Focus is not everyone's cup of tea, but that's the kind of stat that just makes sense to everybody. A guy who caught a lot of first downs, a guy who caught a lot of touchdowns is coming back for this 2023 season, and I frankly don't think we've probably given that enough attention as of yet, because this is about more than McConkey just building on his stats, although it's important to note that this past year when Brock Bowers returned after having 882 yards in 2021, he worked his way up to 942 in 2022, and it would certainly suggest there's a possibility that Ladd McConkey could also build on his big total as he returns here for 2023. But this is clearly about more than just McConkey. It's also about what Ladd has a chance to open up for other Georgia playmakers in this offense. In fact, there may be nobody who understands that better than McConkey himself. I want to go back to Los Angeles National Championship week here for a moment. We had a chance to catch up with Ladd McConkey there at that time. And Ladd, I think, is pretty impressed when he looks around and sees how versatile this Georgia offense can be, both this season, presumably next season there as well. He's clearly a big part of that, but he's not the only guy, and Ladd himself really among the first to say that. So to kind of punctuate all of this, this is Ladd on the Georgia offense from a few weeks ago.
I feel like, and we have a lot of guys that can make a lot of plays, so it's hard to just shut one thing down because it's going to open up another. So I feel like we're versatile, have a lot of guys that have played a lot of football, and I mean that definitely helps us a lot.
So I think that's really well said. It's obviously kind of a loud room. You got a lot of room noise going on there, but I think you can make out what Ladd has to say. This is a versatile offense. There are a lot of different playmakers who can do a lot of big things. That was true in back-to-back national championship seasons in 2021 and 2022. We believe it's also true in 2023. And Ladd coming back, not going to the NFL draft, at least for right now, I would say is a very big deal for Georgia, and maybe the kind of thing that has not gotten quite enough attention as of yet. Now, with that said, let me shift gears and talk about something completely different for a moment. I told you we're going to try to hit a good number of topics on today's show. There is a thing that's out there this week that some Georgia fans have had some fun with, which is our buddy Mike Griffith has been in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, and one of the Georgia players who's been there, apparently doing pretty well in practice here this week, including getting some work at cornerback, I guess, is former Georgia safety Chris Smith, really one of the more accomplished players during this Smart era and one of the more valuable component pieces to the back-to-back national championship season. Smith has been a very big deal for Georgia, and according to a quote that our buddy Mike Griffith got from Chris Smith, Chris also a very big believer in what Georgia can do next year with himself and other of these Georgia seniors no longer on this team. Apparently, Smith already a believer that go for 3 in 23 can be a very real possibility. Let me show you the quote here from Chris Smith that Mike Griffith got, DawgNation.com. He says, we definitely have the capacity to go win another one. First of all, don't you love the idea that it's still we for Smith, even though he'll be watching these games from the stands or on television, but that's still his team, and he still views them as a we. He says, we definitely have the capacity to go win another one. It's definitely legit. He says, we've got all the talent in the world to be able to do that. Once again, that's former Georgia safety Christopher Smith at the Senior Bowl here this week, touting Georgia all ready to go for 3-23. Now, let me tell you what I think is fun about this here for a moment. The fact that this is not some sort of Johnny-come-lately take for Smith. Like, this is not just something he's saying to a reporter while at the Senior Bowl. Apparently, this was already on Christopher Smith's mind in L.A. in the immediate aftermath of the national championship. He was apparently already talking about the notion that Georgia would go win another national championship next year without him playing in the game. And the way we know this is because Kirby Smart himself was saying that in the locker room going back after that 65-7 win against TCU. I've played this audio for you before. It's kind of like that sort of captured locker room speech that some of these inside shows and things like that broadcast here. But what Smith said in the Senior Bowl this week about Georgia winning one again, he already told Kirby Smart that on the field in Los Angeles. Smart himself said so. So let's relive Kirby Smart's comments as a way of accentuating that.
I want to say a special thanks to our seniors. Let's give them 3. I don't know that I've been around a group like that. I don't even know the records you have. Winning this group, 2 national championships. You played through a COVID year. You didn't get extra games. I don't know that anybody can break their record except the next group of seniors. You understand what I'm saying? Chris Smith came to me on stage and said, Coach, you got to win it next year without us.
Don't you love that? I mean, like, they're on the stage celebrating this national championship. And like, this is the one that Chris Smith not only contributed to, Smith may have been among the most important contributors to this national championship. And yet on the stage, confetti raining down, you know, all the fireworks going off, things like that. It's pouring down rain outside, and rain's creeping into the building. But nonetheless, you know, this is the national championship that Chris Smith won. This is his second, by the way, which gives him a little bit of bragging rights compared to some of those great players in 2021 who obviously, you know, went on to the NFL and didn't get a chance to win that second. Like, Smith's got a lot of cachet amongst this recent category of Georgia players. But instead of talking about himself or patting himself on the back, he's already pushing Kirby Smart on the platform, on the stage, saying, y'all got to come win another one of these next year without me here. And, you know, Kirby Smart uses that to a challenge to those 2023 seniors. I think it's really fun. It just sort of speaks to the program culture that's at place at Georgia right now. Obviously, there is something to be said about enjoying the moment that you're in. As Kirby has said for years, be where your feet are. Take that time to celebrate and appreciate all of that. But a guy like Chris Smith also, you know, keeping that competitive edge going and saying, hey, next year we're not going to be here, but y'all better still win that national championship. I think if you're a Dog fan, that's kind of a fun thing to consider. Smith has been a great leader for UGA, and as he kind of moves past his playing eligibility here, it sounds like he's going to be a big fan of these Dogs for a long time to come as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, with a daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented by Kroger, and happy to have you with us. A little bit of a look back there on Go for 2 and 22 and the fun of all of that and the great players like Chris Smith and Lad McConkey who made all that possible. Really a fun conversation to be able to have here on a Friday. We are lucky to be able to do it. And, of course, for however you join us, we're just grateful that you do. 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon. On Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and I say podcast, Apple, Spotify, all kinds of great podcast platforms that we're also able to broadcast this show on. We just appreciate you using one of them, picking one of them, making that your home, and being a part of what we do here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And speaking of Kroger, man, so happy to have them with us, and so excited about the big game coming up next Sunday. And, of course, Kroger doing everything it can to get you stocked up for all of that. I'm talking about a winning snack on savings for the big game fixes, including it's a hard word for me to say, kielbasa, the sausages, the kielbasas. You can get kielbasas and ribs, home chef chicken wings, and, of course, beer, wine, everything else you need for the big game next Sunday. Kroger, already a great place to go to get stocked up on that. In fact, you can find out more, Kroger.com/football. That's Kroger.com/football. Get some kielbasa in your life. I believe I pronounced it correctly that time. Kroger.com/football for a lot more on that. By the way, speaking of Kroger, we'll give you an update on something we announced yesterday on the show. We'll do that here coming up in a couple of minutes' time there as well. And we'll also hear from Jeff Sentell, talk some UGA football recruiting with him. Prior to that, let's go around the DawgHouse. In fact, let's use this as a way of kind of setting the stage for the Jeff Sentell conversation here in a moment. Jeff has been in Arizona this week. He's back home now. But one of the guys he got a chance to spend some time with was the 5-star tight end Duce Robinson, who did not make an official announcement on Wednesday about his college choice, but it certainly seems like as Robinson continues those deliberations with his family, it certainly seems like Georgia remains in a pretty good place for his services here. I'll remind you of something we played on the show a couple of weeks ago. Again, it's been at least a few days. Honestly, the time kind of runs together. I forget how long ago we played this, but some show in the recent past, we played a clip of Kirby Smart being interviewed on the Ernie Johnson Jr. podcast with Charles Barkley, and they had kind of a long-standing bet going on. He and Ernie and Shaq and all that. Well, Kirby goes on this podcast. They're talking about a number of different things, and one of the things that comes up is the fact that Kirby's now been around long enough that guys maybe he was coaching at the beginning of his coaching career when Smart was very young. All of a sudden, they've got sons who are now in the mix to be recruited by Georgia as well, including the guy we've been talking about a lot lately, Duce Robinson. I played this for you before, but it sets us up for something today. Let me let you hear Kirby with EJ and Chuck here one more time about the close tie that Kirby has with the Robinson family. Here is Kirby from that podcast interview.
Dominic Robinson, a guy that I coached at FSU, his son is one of the number one tight ends in the country and great baseball player, and we're recruiting him. When you come across these guys you coached early in your career, it's pretty cool, especially, being 40, 46, 47 years old.
Well, first of all, I don't think you need any more tight ends. I think you're good, okay? I think you're good on the tight end front.
So there are two things that I love about that clip. First of all, at the end, it's hilarious to hear Charles Barkley say, hey, no more tight ends. Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers and all these guys, no more tight ends at Georgia. Now, I'm guessing that Charles Barkley doesn't even realize there's a guy like Oscar Delp on the way and guys like Pierce Spurlin and Lawson Lucky already kind of in the mix here for 2023. Barkley may be fatigued from all the great tight ends that Georgia has, Barkley, of course, being an Auburn grad. But he may not even be aware of how many other tight ends are actually on the way there at UGA, courtesy of Todd Hartley, so that's really fun. The other thing is that Kirby Smart does have to drop it in. You notice this in the conversation about, I've been around long enough now that, guys that I coach, they've got sons who are coming through. But Smart wants to make it very clear to you, and you hear this in the clip, I'm only 46, 47 years old. So it's one of those things of, hey, I've been around for a while now, but just keep this in mind, I'm still in my 40s. I'm still kind of, on the sort of back end of my mid-40s here. So let's not go crazy about the fact that I'm older than I am. So I think it's kind of a nice thing that Kirby Smart kind of reminds you of that, which I think is a little bit funny. But I play the clip, though, really because of something that Kirby was talking about, Dominic Robinson, the father of Duce Robinson. According to a story that Jeff Sentell had last night at DawgNation.com, this tie that Kirby says he has with the Robinson family, Robinson himself says, Mr. Robinson in this case, says that is very real, something that is a big deal. In fact, he thinks it's a bigger deal than some folks even kind of realize. Let me read you this quote from the story that Jeff Sentell had with Robinson's father, DawgNation.com. Dominic Robinson telling Jeff, I think it's underrated. I've been interested in why it hasn't been talked about more. Kirby was my first college coach. And in the midst of that interview that Jeff did with Dominic Robinson, Duce Robinson's father, he talked in more detail about just how close that bond between the two really was. But I wanted to just kind of pull that small part of it out there that Robinson says that actually has not yet gotten enough attention. The fact that Dominic and Kirby have known each other for a very long time. And as Duce Robinson continues to make that deliberation about exactly what it is that he wants to do with his future, apparently it's going to weigh heavy on their mind, the fact that they have known and trusted Kirby for a very long time here. So very interesting stuff from a story that you ought to read there at DawgNation.com. Duce Robinson did not make an announcement this week, but every indication that you get is that Georgia remains a pretty big part of his recruitment. We'll talk to Jeff about that more coming up in just a moment. Let me squeeze this in, though, before we bring on Jeff today. I told you, our friends at Kroger, what a fun thing they've decided to do. And this is one of the reasons why we love partnering with the Krogers, is because when they hear about good stuff going on at DawgNation, they just always want to be a part of it. And we told you yesterday that Kroger's going to give away a trip on the DawgNation cruise this April. With our friends at Royal Caribbean, We're going out of Port Canaveral. We're going to Perfect Day, Coco Cay. We're going to Nassau in the Bahamas. We're doing all of that April 24th through the 28th. So many of you have already signed up to be a part of it. And someone now is going to win a Dog Nation Cruise giveaway courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Now, the registration for your chance to win is open right now, and it remains so all the way through February 10th on that. Here are the details. This is what Kroger's giving away. They're giving away a stateroom with room for up to 2 people. Also a hotel room the night before in Port Canaveral prior to that sailing. That'll be April 23rd that you'll stay in Port Canaveral. So that way you're kind of in place to be on the ship, the next day. We always kind of recommend that. Gas card, onboard credits there as well. So all you got to do is go to DawgNation.com. And it's amazing, our good friend Casey, who works with us, she's actually set this up so you can actually register for your chance to win right there through the website at DawgNation.com. It's very, very simple. It's kind of like one click and you got it. We got all kinds of new technological advancements going on, which is very impressive for me. And all you got to do is just sort of, to register for your chance to win, all you got to do is just sort of give us your favorite memory from Georgia's 2022 season. And of everybody who submits their entry and submits, their information, we're going to draw a winner at random for our Dog Nation cruise here. Really, really excited about that. And a big thanks from our friends at Kroger giving this away for us. So go to DawgNation.com. You can find out more about this, and you can enter for your chance to win right there on the website. Hope to see you with us on that Dog Nation cruise coming up this April. All right, we are going to have a really fun show. Before we're done, reason to laugh at Alabama here. New information, very, very serious in details about what the future of the SEC is going to look like sooner rather than later, or maybe the opposite of that. Big news coming out of the league's expansion efforts. We'll talk about that here on the show. But for now, following up on the Duce Robinson conversation we were just having and everything else as it relates to UGA recruiting, let's talk about all of that here today with Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good to have Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. And Jeff, before you joined us, we were talking a little bit about the story you had last night, DawgNation.com, with Dominic Robinson, the father of Duce Robinson. And the quote that we shared, and I think this is a really interesting one, is the fact that Robinson, Mr. Robinson in this case, doesn't think that the bond that he and Kirby have had dating back to the very early 2000s, he doesn't think that's gotten enough attention in this recruitment. I think that's a very interesting way of describing all of that. Obviously, the Duce thing has turned out to be a little complicated here, but the fact that that Mr. Robinson here is touting the family relationship with Kirby, if you're a UGA fan, I think that's supposed to mean something to you, is it not?
Yeah, Brennan, it was. And first of all, good morning to everybody back from Arizona. But that's something that was real, and it's not just the way the words show up on the page. He was, he was effusive in the way he said that was a meaningful thing. He is a coach, Brennan. He was a 5-star himself back in 2001. He trains pro baseball players. He trains college football players. He works with a lot of youth in the Arizona area and across the country. But when he started talking about that relationship with Kirby, man, that was some deep stuff. I mean, it was like you could tell it mattered to him, and you could tell just what he talked about when taking pictures and what it would mean like. When he looks at Kirby Smart, he says, that's my college coach. That's my first coach. And those two have been tight. Those two have been incredible together for, 22, 23 years now. And now listen, Brandon, I know everybody wants to know, all right, Jeff, that's a good story, yada, yada, yada. Somebody else really likes Georgia. Kirby made an impression on somebody. But for me, this is the whole bigger picture narrative. We don't cover a story quite like this one where you have Major League Baseball intersecting with NIL, intersecting with, the pure recruiting battle between a Georgia and a Texas and a USC and, maybe an Oregon in there as well. And then you have the lure of him, an athlete wanting to play both sports in this era. And all that, will he be drafted high enough to maybe forego his football dream? Will it not matter? Does he want to do both? I mean, this is a very nuanced story with a lot of layers to it. And that's a reason why, Duce may choose to play for the Dodgers. Duce may end up with the Dodgers and the USC Trojans. Duce may end up at Georgia. But regardless, that's a very valid nugget there for folks to think. Why is Georgia really, really in this thing, and why this young man and this family are going to feel a strong tug to go to Georgia, regardless of how complicated this stuff gets.
So that's a pretty strong case for Georgia, and we've obviously talked a lot about Robinson in baseball as of late. What's the USC angle on all of this? Like, how real is the idea that Robinson will eventually come to the conclusion that he is a football player and that's his best path at eventual stardom and riches, and yet he just sort of decides to play for USC instead of for Georgia? Like, what is the argument for USC, and what are their feelings about USC?
So, let me see. That's a good question, Brendan. I'm glad you asked that. Deuce has been, and let me just, Deuce has been that dude or that guy in baseball, Brandon, for years. He didn't really even start playing football in pads until his freshman year of high school. And due to COVID and due to an injury, he only played like 13 games of football coming into his senior year. So he's really only played a year and a half, 2 years of football in pads experience. Baseball has always been the longtime girlfriend. That's been the steady. That's the one that knows his warts, that knows everything about Deuce. Football is the new kid on the block, or that new person that just moved into high school and turned everybody's heads. That's the one that's kind of like, football kind of feels like this is the sudden thing. This is the thing that's not really grounded and foundational in his athletic career. To answer your question about USC, Brandon, I think there's some, I don't know whether it's concern or validity to the fact that, the Dodgers really like Deuce as a baseball player. And so the one sandbox theory is if the Dodgers do pick him pretty high, then it is very easy for that organization to keep tabs on him when, I think their spring training is obviously in Arizona. I think their rookie ball team is in Texas, but I think their single-A team is in, just an hour away from USC. So that feels location-wise a connection. And the way USC is recruiting Deuce is, he hasn't been there in a while, a long time. But the way they're recruiting him, Brandon, is they're just dropping all the pleasantries, man. They look at him as a receiver. They think of him as a game-breaker type player in Lincoln Riley's offense. That's kind of what they're doing there. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Deuce probably, you look at him on the hoof, you look at him on game film, you look at him in tape, he shows a lot more right now as a receiver, but almost exclusively as a receiver this past fall for his high school team than a pure hand-in-the-ground tight end. Really not done that. That scouting step or the next level of his advancement at that position is going to be huge in college, kind of like Pierce Sperling III. Really strong athlete, great ball skills, great size, great frame, but never really, used to blocking guys and being an inline blocker and being the type of tight end all around that Georgia demands out of its top-tier talent that go play tight end. With Lincoln Riley and USC, I think mainly they see him as another game-breaker receiver with that they'll flex out to receiver and do a lot of things with in terms of the way that school is recruiting him.
Let me just say one more thing. I want to talk about a different player here for a moment. And I mentioned this on our podcast Cool Down yesterday because I've tried to, kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into this. He's probably a better baseball prospect than I've given him credit for. Baseball America ranks him 123 on their top 200 prospects list. That's not nothing. I mean, it's very hard to be on a Baseball America, top 200 type list. But 123rd still not quite getting him to the draft slot he wants to be in. And there are a lot of 18-year-old outfielders ranked ahead of him, and many of them are also 6'5" as well. So, there are a lot of guys from a baseball standpoint who sort of do what Robinson does, and they kind of do it on a more full-time basis than what Robinson does it. So, on the one hand, he is a better baseball prospect than I've given him credit for, and on the other hand, he's probably still not actually the kind of baseball prospect that really moves the needle come, this summer in the Major League Baseball draft. So understanding all of that, where does that leave us in terms of how baseball really impacts his future?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think the thing you got to compare Deuce to is, and let's first off drop the clarifier that it only takes one team. But as I wrote in the most recent Deuce Robinson story on our site, which we posted last night in the air at about 40,000 feet, you have a situation here where Brandon, the first 3 rounds of the MLB draft, there's a certain pool of, I think, upwards of $3 to $4 million that are attached to those players that go in the first 3 rounds. So the way a lot of major league organizations look at it, and I've had a lot of scouts and a lot of agents kind of tailor my thinking on that, or just really dial in what to look at there. Brandon, those got to be can't-miss guys. Those got to be guys that are clean prospects. You know, are going to contribute. The pick is going to be in. The pick is going to get made. He's going to sign. You know, he is going to go to play for your team and help your ball club. Those guys kind of got to be labeled under that can't miss angle. And the thing really for Duce is it's not just the scouting projection folks can make, but he would be going against guys that play baseball full time, that develop that hit tool they have full time, and not with the layered thinking here, with the duality here of, hey, Duce is also a football player. You know, a lot of things, I learned a lot of things in Arizona this week. One of the things I learned is I don't really think it makes sense for Duce to play college baseball, because that's going to get really bumpy with spring practice and college football. And, you know, the way his dream, and it is a dream, Brandon, and you're around it a little bit more, and it doesn't seem as far-fetched as it does in print or just talking about it around the water cooler. The reason why I say that is because when somebody just says, hey, this guy's going to try and play pro football and pro baseball at the same time, and people go, wow, who's done that? Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, Brian Jordan, you know, Kyler Murray a little bit. You know, there haven't been a lot of success stories recently. And people are going to be like, good luck with that. That never happens. Well, here's also what never happens. Duce's father is an elite trainer for football players and baseball players. He played both at Florida State. He played sometime in the NFL as a receiver and a punt returner for the Rams. But all of his life, he's been around elite athletes. Like, he's been to national championship games. I think he was in his mother's belly for a national championship game, I think between Oklahoma. One year, Oklahoma was in it. It's just, and then like coming up through the ranks around elite pro baseball and travel teams, like he's always been around guys that are on that projection. Like, here's a great example. Like, I was talking to a guy, first round pick of the Braves this past year. He trains with Dominic Robinson, his father, and he's just like, man, I've known Duce was a big deal for forever. Like I'm sitting here in a club, we're going to a tournament, we're in a dugout, and we're like looking around, and you're trying to figure out who all these guys are and where they're from, and you see this 6'5" kid, and you're like, okay, where are you from? You know, what year are you? And he's like, no, man, the coach is my dad. And he's like, what? He's like, yeah. He's like, I'm 14. He's like, he looked like a guy that was on that, a peer to an MLB first rounder from the Braves. And even though he was considerably younger than him, like, the skills are there, they're just not developed, Brandon. And maybe the best window I can give you of insight here is that imagine you're looking at a huddle film of a 5-star prospect, and the thing is only 2 minutes long. That's kind of what pro baseball talent evaluators and cross-checkers and scouts tell me about Duce, is they just haven't seen him enough to know exactly what's there. And this spring allows him more evaluation, more of a chance to be seen and be scouted, and for his rankings to rise a little bit. The big thing I think that will keep him a college football player is, one, he really wants to do it. It's part of his dream. But the baseball tools will not be advanced and developed enough for a major league franchise to buy out his dream of playing college football, if that makes any sense. I think he's not going to get to the stage as a prospect where somebody's going to offer him enough money and draft him high enough for him to forget about football, or for him to just put football off to the side.
No, I think that's a good way to say all of that. Having been out in Arizona, you got anything new to tell us about Dylan Raiola, the 5-star quarterback for the class of 2024? What's going on with him right now?
Yeah, so I saw him yesterday, Brandon. He was working out. Had a throwing session with Pinnacle High School. Brandon, I know you and I both love Georgia high school football for all of its wrinkles and all of its beauty marks, to say the least.
Sure.
But Brandon, in Arizona, first of all, this is fascinating. There is open enrollment. Like, there's no bona fide move. There's no show us your power bill, show us your mail, show us your lease, show us your rental agreement. You just go anywhere you want, Brandon. As long as the school's not full, you can go anywhere you want. It's called open enrollment. And, I mean, they don't have spring spring practice in Arizona, obviously. So it's a different world out there. But he has moved to Duce's old high school where Duce played his high school football. And they were on a throwing session. They were working out. And he's 6'3", about 220, big, powerful arm, just ripping the ball, doing his conditioning running afterward. Going to visit Georgia, Brandon, on March 18th. That's when he's got scheduled up in Athens. That's actually one of the first days, if not the first actual on-field day of spring practice in Athens. He wanted to be there. That trip is booked. He's contemplating other plans. Like, one of the things he told me, and I don't know if he's really felt comfortable about throwing out a timeline yet, but he really wants to have his decision made before he starts playing games in the fall. He really needs to see some other schools out there, but also Dylan has definitely heard the word from the current Georgia commitments about, hey, let's just say the welcome mat is really rolled out there for him to come be a part of the 2024 class, Brandon, which I feel will be the strongest class of the Kirby Smart era in Athens, and that's like saying that's the one Brandon Adams show where he really went deep off into the weeds about a subject or whatever. But for him and for potential there with Georgia, and I'm just going to say it, Brandon, I'm not going to be that guy that pushes the package deal stuff, but all I know is Dominic Raiola, that's the father of Dylan Raiola. And then Dominic Robinson, that's the father of Duce Robinson. Man, there are a lot of threads here between these two guys. They work out together. They know each other well. There is the thought that, if it all works out, those two guys really would love to play together in college. It would be a dream come true. It would be a dream fulfilled. And they both know what each other can do. They both know their skill sets. And folks want to know, how does Georgia keep ascending from the trajectory it is now with back-to-back natties? Well, you keep stockpiling that defense better than ever. And then you start getting offensive players like a Duce Robinson, offensive players like a Dylan Raiola as well on that offensive side of the ball to go along with it. The recruiting up front, the recruiting for Stacey Searles on the offensive line, still getting those tight ends, now getting a little bit more game breakers at receiver. And you're really going to have something special, even more special than what we've seen so far in Athens.
That's really interesting to consider there, too. We haven't had a chance to talk about Dwight Phillips yet. This is a 2024 recent commit to Georgia. You call him an athlete, but I guess at Georgia going to be a running back. And it certainly seems like, and I've talked to Terrence Edwards about this yesterday a little bit, it certainly seems like that Phillips is an example of what seems to be going on at Georgia right now, an intentional attempt to kind of upgrade a lot of offensive positions in the speed category. And Phillips seems to kind of bring that to the table. Is that kind of your read on this situation, too? A guy that brings maybe more speed to the running back position than we're kind of used to seeing from Georgia in recent years?
Yeah, certainly that, Brandon. And man, it just shows you how busy Georgia football recruiting and Georgia football simple coverage is right now. I think we're going to look back, Brandon, and we're going to look back and say that the Dwight Phillips Jr. story, recruitment, nobody really made as big a deal out of it as we should have. Like, I've got a video with him that's going to go up soon on the DawgNation YouTube channels. We're going to get a story up on him sometime soon, but here's some clip notes. I think he's going to have a DeAndre Swift type, James Cook type career in Athens, and that's a considerable benchmark there. Because, number one, it's just the pure athleticism, Brandon. Everybody throws out the 10-4-3, but the DNA of that 10-4-3 to me is utterly fascinating because he promised his dad, oh, by the way, Dad was an 8-time All-American in college at Kentucky, and then also, and then his mom was an 8-time All-American as well. And then his dad goes on, Dwight Phillips, Senior, or the original Dwight Phillips, goes on to win like the world championship in the long jump 4 times. He wins a gold medal in the Athens Olympics. Isn't that great parallel or whatever? But his dad, they've never really done track with Dwight Phillips Jr. at all. They've never really, his mom actually trains and his dad doesn't. And he literally promised his dad, here's Dad made him promise him, you're going to give me 5 races this past spring. And that was his first really experience at all with running track, Brandon. And he runs like a 10-4, a 10-4, a 10-4, and a 10-4-3. These are all laser 10-4s in those 5 meets. And he goes 10-4-3 in the 7A Georgia state championships and wins the state championship. They think a 10-1 is possible. But he could run a 10-0, Brandon, and he's a football player. He's always been a football player. He was a guy watching YouTube videos when he was 6, 7, 8 years old. He was a guy, saying, Phillips takes to the left, Phillips runs in the end zone. I mean, his dream has been football and not track. And this guy has ludicrous, silly speed, like erasing angle speed. Like, Brandon, the first time he touched the ball in high school was on a kickoff return. And he took it 94 yards, and he was laughing about it. He still laughs about it to this day because he's like, man, I just didn't want to get killed. I didn't want to get creamed. I was a freshman out there. I probably weighed 160 pounds, soaking wet, 150. I just didn't want to get smeared, and he just erases angles through all that. And he's a guy, he's about 175 right now, Brandon. Georgia wants to get him to about 185, 190 when he gets to campus. But this is a guy that is game breaker electric, and I pity the defensive coordinator that has to deal with whatever Georgia has at tight end and all these new game breakers at receiver and the quarterback. And you're like, well, we only got one dude to really worry about the kid that's probably running a 4.25 by then. He's got a legitimate verified 4.28 time in the 40, Brandon. And he's a number 4 running back in the country. And, I mean, it's one of those hurrahs for Georgia football recruiting that I don't even think a guy like myself or yourself have really trumpeted as much as maybe it deserves.
That's exactly right. And speaking of 2024 commits, you and I talked the other day on video about Ellis Robinson. I'm not going to rehash a lot of that other than to kind of echo something you said before. To me, getting a 5-star cornerback on National Signing Day for the 2023 class, looking ahead to the 2024 cycle, the Robinson announcement for me is as much an indication as anything is that, Georgia really may be firing at a different level in recruiting for this 2024 class than we've seen in the past. And I say that knowing full well how good some of these Georgia recruiting classes have been. But 2024, I mean, it looks like the possibility of breaking a lot of barriers and bringing in a lot of big names, whether it be in-state guys or national guys, top flight quarterback like Raiola. I mean, you see a lot of momentum in place here. And that's what the Ellis Robinson thing for me meant on Wednesday, is that Georgia is already really firing on all cylinders for this class of 2024.
Here's funny. I'm going to give you an Ellis Robinson update with a little bit of your insatiable appetite for Dylan Raiola. So Dylan Raiola gets a text on National Signing Day, a couple hours after Ellis Robinson makes his announcement. And Ellis texted him, and it was basically like, when are you next? When are you next? It's your turn. And, I mean, that's kind of the way it is. And, Brendan, you look at the 2024 class, and it defies recruiting physics. They've already got, some would say Peyton Woodard is the number 1 safety or the number 2 safety. They've already got him committed. He's a staunch advocate, ambassador. I think we used the term many, many years ago, Pied Piper, when we first started recovering Georgia recruiting, to talk about a guy that's just pointing the way to other big dudes to join the class. And then they get Jalen Hayward as well. He's the number 3 safety in the country. Mm-hmm. And, Brandon, you think that would shut the barn door? That would be Katie bar the door for other safeties. Brandon, there is a strong, legitimate chance that Georgia could also add K.J. Bolden in this class. And people look at him as an athlete, but he can play some receiver. Probably wouldn't want to play receiver at Ohio State because they've stockpiled there as well. But, safeties may be a great fit there. And, Brandon, there's a legitimate chance that K.J. Bolden will strongly consider Georgia all the way to the end, and he won't even worry about, like, Woodyard's there and Hayward's there. I mean, Jalen Hayward could become the next Javon Bullard-type guy as the star position or as the nickel position in Athens. There's so much flexibility in his game to play all over the place. When I mean defying recruiting physics is like guys don't even worry about that anymore. They don't worry about who's there and, how good the freshmen and sophomores are there. They just look at Georgia. They look at Malachi Starks, they look at Jalen Walker, they look at Michael Williams, they look at Dylan Bell, and they're like, man, if you're good enough, you'll play. It doesn't matter who's there, doesn't matter what happens. You'll play if you're good enough to be on the field. And you see this, what they're doing at every position. They are literally, they're literally basically locking down, and they're not being very, very generous with a lot of this elite talent at a lot of positions. And the thing that makes it very strong, they're evaluating the right guys, man. Brandon, everybody looks at these Alabama recruiting classes, and Alabama, depending on which service you're looking at, they either have 9 5-stars or 7 5-stars right now, and that's a lot. But you look at those players, and I think some of the best players in Alabama's class are the JUCO guys that are 4-stars. like maybe some of the right players aren't really 5 stars, but you still got to see with Alabama, they've missed a whole lot building the team from the trenches, from the inside out over the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, Georgia was even prone to that with it looks like with his offensive line class in 2022. Like, you don't have, you got to hit on those guys. Those guys got to be guys like, look at Georgia's future right now. You see guys like Dylan Fairchild, Micah Morris. Those guys have been in the program for a couple of years, and they're going to be ready to roll. They're going to be third-year sophomores, and they're going to be like, where do these guys come from? They're animals. But that's just what's been happening with Georgia. When you have those guys that are dudes that have waited their turn, I think Broderick Jones is a perfect example, Brandon. Really, he had 5-6 games of playing time due to the Jamari Salyer injury in 2021, but he is ready to roll in 2022. He looks like a top 15 pick, Brandon, the stuff that's been coming out in scouting right now about Broderick Jones. You hear stories about him running a 20 on the catapult on the GPS in practice for GPS numbers for a 300-pound tackle, just how incredible an athlete he is. You hear stories about him running side by side with Kenny McIntosh in scrimmages and in practice periods. And that's just another rare athlete for Georgia that really got on the field and got showcased for one season in Athens, and they'll probably feel that same way with Amarius Mims in the 2023 season, Brandon. It's just what they have there. And the other thing, Brandon, is the recruits you talk to on the road, they notice it. They notice Georgia's got dudes. They notice 15 guys in the NFL get drafted, and they know there's a whole wave of new names that feel like they could start anywhere else in college football, but they're ready to roll once they hit the field in Athens. I know I'm getting long-winded. I've got so much information to share, Brandon, but it really is a very special time going on right now in Athens. I hope folks are able to get their arms around it all.
I have kept you long. Let me squeeze this in very quick because I thought you had a good story the other day with Jamal Meriweather, the offensive lineman from Brunswick. He got the news that he was looking for this week, that official graphic going up from Georgia. Nice video with him. That's obviously, in fact, I think we can show this to you. That's the kind of the signifier there that he is officially a part of that 2023 class there for Georgia. You had a story with him at DawgNation.com this week about how hard he's kind of worked to kind of be able to get that official announcement there in place. Nice to see that have a happy ending for you this week.
Yeah, it is, Brennan, and that's the guy that Georgia came in late and did that senior year evaluation. I mean, you heard Kirby Smart share stories about this a couple years back about everybody was really late to the party on a guy like Bradley Chubb, and he thinks the senior year evaluation has really not been prioritized the way it should over the last 5-10 years in college football. And Jamal Meriweather is a guy, Brandon, he's only been playing offensive line for like 2 years. He's super athletic with great feet. He's 6'7", and he was just kind of parked in kind of Central Florida. Thought, man, we're going to have a guy that we're going to put on our marketing one day about an NFL draft, Golden Knight, a guy that goes really high, like a first-round type tools player that they've just kind of snuck in South Georgia and just kind of plucked and found for themselves. Well, Georgia found him really late, like November, December of his senior year, and Georgia got the quick flip. It's really nuanced because I want people to understand this really wasn't a Jamal thing with the grades. Like we're going to reach a point, Brandon, in college football. I think the legislation has already passed where the ACT and the SCT are no longer benchmarks for qualification. And while that will probably be the knockout punch for JUCO football, it's going to mean you just take your core classes, you have your GPA, and you're in, and there's no such thing as sliding scales anymore. But some schools, some universities, and it's weird, Brandon, some upper crust coastal elite schools, they don't require an ACT and an SAT score as part of your admission packet. You know, when these guys get signed scholarships with Georgia, they still have to be admitted. They still have to go through a packet, which includes an essay, which includes a lot of paperwork on their end. They got to have an ACT. They got to have an SAT. And like when Jamal flipped to Georgia really late, he didn't have those things yet. He had taken those standardized tests, but the scores weren't back yet. So Georgia and the admissions office had to have all that stuff in. Brandon, he signed back during December, but all that information, all that paperwork was not in yet for him. So like the university couldn't admit him, and they couldn't release his signature until obviously just yesterday. And I know a lot of people thought that, this young man had been, a lot of this was just nuanced about the way his situation all came together, the way before he could become a Bulldog. He gave me a great quote over the weekend because he finally took his official visit just this past weekend. He gave me a great quote, and he basically said something to the extent of, I know this all feels like a dream, but I've got to realize the dream is just getting started now, getting to go play for Georgia. And this is a young man who looks very happy to be a Bulldog. Brandon, we might look back on that one in a couple of years and think, that kind of Chris Smith, that kind of Jordan Davis, that kind of the Dogs went and found another gym. They kind of found one when everybody else was right. It was right under everyone's noses, and they found another one. The program that really doesn't need to be finding hidden gems when they already have so many in the trophy case.
Jeff, great stuff. Glad to have you back here on the east side of the country after spending some time out in Arizona. Look forward to reading a whole bunch of good stuff from you there at DawgNation.com. And, of course, talking to you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, again very soon as well.
Hey, man, love to do it. And I'll have one for you. I'll have a Duce Robinson story coming up sometime this weekend that only a Star Wars fan would love to read.
Good to know.
And I know that one will catch your attention because, man, Duce knows him some things about Hoth and Endor and Tatooine that you wouldn't believe.
Good to know, Jeff. Look forward to that, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take it easy, brother. See you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Jeff, I said something really important there. We're talking about Jamal Meriweather, and this is one of those things that's kind of a big deal to me, which is that around here we talk about, 5-star this and high 4-star that, and a lot of guys who, as recruits, are kind of at that sort of superstar level. And yet there is a part of me that I love the high school game, and I love it for more than just the fact that it populates the Georgia roster with really good players. Kirby Smart's one of those guys that I do think he genuinely cares about high school football. Obviously, his dad, was a towering figure in high school football for a long time. That's a huge influence on Kirby and his coaching life, the biggest influence on Kirby and his coaching life. And there is something to be said for guys like Meriweather getting that big senior year, earning the attention of a place like Georgia. Yes, Jamal being here on the Georgia campus obviously helps Georgia. But I love the idea that senior year evaluation can take place and a guy can grow as a prospect based on what he does while he's in the 12th grade. I just really, really like that. And, we've talked before about I'm not a huge fan of the December early signing period. I think there is some momentum that maybe one day that might be changed. I hope it's not changed just to move it up to August the way that some people want to, because my fear is, and maybe this will be less true than it appears, but I think I'm kind of right about this, that if you move that early signing period up to like late summer prior to those senior years beginning, then you might lose out on a chance for a guy like Meriweather or some of the other names that we've seen, for guys that have really made a name for themselves, drawn SEC level attention or like high Power 5 level attention, doing that during their senior year. I want that to be a part of the recruiting process. For all the attention we give, like the 5-star guys and the high 4-star guys, the guys who could go anywhere, the players who earn that attention late in the process that weren't getting it prior to that, that's a really fun part of all of this for me there as well. By the way, speaking of having fun, you better believe we're looking forward to having some fun coming up this April on board Independence of the Seas for our second ever cruise with DawgNation. And obviously Jessica Slater's a great travel agent, and she's helped us out with all of this. I would tell you, reach out to Jessica, see if there's any space left on this DawgNation cruise, but also talk to her about anything that you want to do as it relates to a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, because one of the reasons that she was specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean is just simply because she's got so much expertise on helping folks like you and me as well find the Royal Caribbean cruise ship, the Royal Caribbean cruise itinerary that's perfect for us. She's done that for me. I've got a cruise coming up in really just a few weeks. I've got a sort of a larger extended family cruise that we're going to be taking in June. And, listen, one of these like a 7-day cruise, one of these like a 3-night sort of weekend type cruise. So there's lots of different options that are out there, and there may be a perfect option for you. Jessica can help you out with all of that. So go to royaldogs.com. That's a website that she's put together that kind of gives you a lot of information about the DawgNation cruise, and you can see some interesting stuff there. But acquaint yourself a little bit more with Jessica, and then find out about whether it be going out of Port Canaveral, which I like to do, but also just in the state of Florida alone. You've got Port Everglades down there near Fort Lauderdale. You've got the port there in Miami. That's going to be the port to know coming up next January when Icon of the Seas makes its debut. That's going to be an amazing ship to see. In fact, we show you some of the video of that sometime. We're doing that right now. If you're watching on video, this is a ship that's going to be kind of delivered late 2023, first sailings January of 2024, and it's just going to be awesome. It's going to be an amazing thing. Really kind of redefining what a cruise vacation is all about. And I love that about Royal Caribbean, always kind of pushing the envelope when it comes to stuff like that and kind of finding a way to take that cruise vacation to that next level. That's really what our friends at Royal Caribbean are all about. So find out more about that. You can go to royaldogs.com, talk to Jessica. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. She has got you covered on all of that. All right, I want to go cruise around the SEC now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and give you a couple of SEC-related notes, including this about the future of the SEC. Now, I'm going to read this. A couple of people have had this. I'm going to read it from Matt Fortuna on Twitter. Fortuna works for The Athletic. Apparently, there had been a push. I mean, we know this. There had been a push to maybe find a way to get Texas and Oklahoma into the SEC sooner than originally thought. It sounds like that's kind of stalled out here. I want to read this from Fortuna, who says, after weeks of recent negotiations, the effort to get Oklahoma and Texas out of the Big 12 and into the SEC 1 year ahead of schedule has reached what he calls a breaking point, with talks currently stalled between the conferences, the schools, and the TV partners. Fortuna goes on to say that it appears that more and more likely that Oklahoma and Texas are not going to begin SEC play before their contractual start date of the 2025-2026 academic year. He says the Big 12's board has a pre-scheduled meeting today in Dallas. Pete Thamel, I guess, had this first, so maybe I should have read his tweets, but I think he basically had the same thing that Fortuna had there. And I guess this is not a huge surprise to me from just the simple standpoint of, while having Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC over the long haul makes the SEC more money, and the TV partners are certainly happy about that, I don't know that it makes the league any more revenue to have this happen sooner rather than later. So the idea that the SEC was just going to sort of take the bath of bringing in Texas and Oklahoma into this league early, have them chop up the revenue pie 16 ways before the new contract kicks in, I guess I'm not super surprised there's not a huge level of appetite for that, and nor was there a big appetite on the part of ESPN to say, okay, well, let's start paying the SEC more money for the opportunity to kind of televise more of these Texas and Oklahoma games, because the ESPN family of networks is already getting to televise some of those games as it is. So I guess I'm not all that surprised by the breakdown on this, just given the fact that there wasn't a huge financial motivation, it would seem, on the part of any party to make this happen sooner rather than later. However, the problem for college sports is, and this may impact fans more so than it impacts like the key decision makers, the suits types. I think if you're college football here, you got to be really, really careful that you don't make the next year or two. This is true in the SEC, but it's also true in college football at large. You got to be really careful that you don't make all of this just sort of feel very lame duckish, like we're just kind of at the end of an old era, just sort of biding our time for the start of a new era. I'll give you an example of this. So when the Big 12 the other day released its schedule for next season, a lot of conferences kind of have a big schedule reveal, kind of like the NFL does. The Big 12 did this the other day, and all of the various Big 10 teams, I should say Big 12 teams, had their own fancy way of doing this. Some made videos, some had their own special graphics, things like that. But all Texas and Oklahoma did was just retweet the Big 12's tweet announcing the schedule. They had no fanfare related to their Big 12 schedule because, frankly, Texas and Oklahoma aren't that excited about being in the Big 12 anymore. They're about to be in the SEC. Conversely, the Big 12 is not that excited about having Texas and Oklahoma still in this league, given the fact that they're looking to move on. And obviously, they're, I'm sure, disappointed that the two flagship schools are leaving. But I would say from the perspective of the Big 12, the sooner they leave, the better, just simply because we're just kind of at the end of that old era. The Big 12 is bringing in new schools, and clearly they're just ready to kind of turn the page, and yet financially there isn't much motivation to accelerate this process much more. And as far as like the lame duck thing goes, this is more than just the SEC and its potential expansion. It's also kind of true for the college football playoff too. Now, we don't notice this here very much because Georgia's just dominating college football, and that's fun for us. But, we're moving into the final year of the 14 playoff, and there are a lot of schools that probably feel like their access to the playoff goes up once you expand to 12. So is this one of those years in which the entire sport just sort of feels like it's sort of waiting for change to occur? SEC expansion, college football playoff expansion, and that this is just sort of a lost year at the end of the old way before the new way kind of kicks in. We won't notice this at Georgia because, as I said, Georgia's winning right now hand over fist, and everybody's enjoying that down here. But for the rest of college football, you sort of get the impression they're not having quite as much fun right now and waiting for all of this eventual change to take place. And at least, according to some national reporters, the eventual change in the SEC, you may have to wait a little longer for that to occur. Staying in the SEC here for a moment with the situation in Alabama, very interesting stuff as it relates to Alabama's offensive coordinator search. It certainly appears that the most likely person to emerge as the new offensive play caller for the Crimson Tide might be Tommy Rees at Notre Dame. The Alabama plane was seen in Tuscaloosa. There's been some photographic evidence of that on social media. That Bama has gone up to talk to Rees. Notre Dame says that they will pay to keep him. And yet ultimately, a lot of folks around South Bend seem to think that Rees could be on his way to Alabama to become Alabama offensive coordinator. Now, what's interesting about this is if they do eventually hire Rees, it sort of appears that he will be no better than third choice for this Alabama offensive coordinator job. We already know they interviewed Ryan Grubb, the Washington offensive coordinator. Grubb announced shortly after that he was staying in Seattle. He makes a lot of money with the Huskies. 24/7 Sports, I believe, did report that Grubb got offered the Alabama job. Apparently, we're led to believe that he turned it down. Well, not only did Grubb apparently turn down this job, but also Joe Moorhead did there as well. John Talty, who covers Alabama for AL.com, actually Michael Casagrande had this first, I guess. But before Tommy Rees was reached out to by Alabama, they also reached out to former Mississippi State head coach Joe Moorhead about the offensive coordinator job. Moorhead's the head coach at Akron. Now, we have seen coordinators come from the head coaching ranks in the past. That's what Dan Enos did at Arkansas a couple of years ago when he left Central Michigan. We've had a couple of examples of that. Bobby Petrino left Missouri State as its head coach to become Texas A&M offensive coordinator here this year there as well. So it would not be unheard of for Petrino to go from Moorhead to go from head coach to coordinator. But apparently he didn't want to do that, which obviously if you're a Georgia fan, you kind of laugh at the idea that Alabama got turned down again. But that's not the most interesting part of this. Let me tell you what the most interesting part of this is from my perspective. The pool of candidates that Alabama is looking at right now are, to my eyes, just frankly not all that impressive. You go look at Rees, the offense there at Notre Dame. They were somewhere in like the 40s this year in terms of points scored per game. This was not a very potent offense there in South Bend. In the case of Joe Moorhead, last time he was an offensive coordinator, this is with Oregon. He was the Oregon offensive coordinator. Kind of brought there to upgrade an offense that had gotten pretty stale. Pretty boring. He was supposed to make great changes there to that offense, and he didn't really do it. Moorhead, I would not categorize as a success during his time there with the Ducks, working with Mario Cristobal, who was the head coach. Now, maybe you blame that on Mario because moving on to Miami, his offenses have kind of struggled a little bit there as well. But in the case of Moorhead resurrecting the Oregon offense, something he was hired to do, he wasn't really able to do that. So not only is it somewhat funny that Moorhead allegedly has turned down the Alabama OC job, but when you look at Moorhead and when you look at Rees, you are not exactly looking at guys at the top of their profession, and apparently that's who Alabama's considering as its offensive coordinator right now. I told you the other day that I thought the whole Todd Grantham as defensive coordinator thing was a smokescreen because surely to goodness they had a better candidate than that. When you look at who they're also considering hiring as offensive coordinators, maybe they just don't have better candidates right now. It is not exactly the most distinguished list of potential contenders to become these Alabama coordinators right now. Kind of a tough look there for Alabama. Two other quick stories here. Anaya Smith coming back to A&M as a wide receiver, kind of withdrawing his consideration for the NFL draft. Yeah, I don't know how big of a deal this is. I don't think he'd have been drafted all that high had he stayed in the NFL draft. But just given the huge number of players that have left Texas A&M, any Aggie player right now saying I want to come back is probably to a degree kind of a big deal. And as we said before, that is Bobby Petrino now as A&M offensive coordinator. I know that right now Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies are the butt of a lot of jokes, and I get why that is. I do think there is some chance, though, that Petrino can resurrect that Texas A&M offense a little bit, and any potential returning playmaker makes that process maybe just a little bit easier. So Smith coming back will give that note to you. And then for those of you that like betting on SEC games and things like that, there is some chatter afoot about the possibility. I know our friends at the AJC have reported on this, AJC.com. A little bit of chatter out there about the idea that sports wagering could be legalized in Georgia. Now, what makes this interesting, and maybe more interesting than some of the times in which this has been discussed in the past, is apparently some of the legislators have kind of a legal angle on this where they would not have to put this to a public vote. You know, it has been commonly thought that in order to legalize wagering in Georgia, you'd have to create a constitutional amendment to do so. This is obviously well outside the boundaries of what we normally talk about in this show. I have no idea what legally is proper on all of this, but the folks who are pushing this seem to think they can do it without having to have a public vote, and obviously that increases the likelihood that maybe it happens. So if this is something you want, you might eventually get it. I really don't know where this is going, but this seems a little more serious than some of the other legalized sports gambling in Georgia conversations we've had in the past. So I'd say stick close to the AJC, AJC.com. They may be able to give you a little bit more information on all of that, and we will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, here on Fridays, we always love to kind of close out our show with what we call the Big Finish, presented by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And obviously, it is a weekend without football, so everyone's going to be doing what they can to have the fun they can. And, of course, for many of us, that means the Finish Long Drink there as well. In fact, I want to show you this tweet from the Finish Long Drink on Twitter. Obviously, the Finish Long Drink comes from Finland. We've told you the story before, kind of starting in Helsinki with the Summer Games when they were there back in the 1950s, and it's been in America now for a couple of years. So the Finish Long Drink on Twitter says, this is how Finnish people keep warm during the winter. Obviously a famously cold place. You see the guy there drinking that long drink cranberry, so he's having a good time doing that and maybe staying warm out there during the cold winters up there in Finland. So maybe this weekend you can do the same thing with the Finish Long Drink. If you've never tried some before, great time to do so. Just go to thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code. You can find out where to pick up some Finish Long Drink here today, whether it be a bar or a beverage store or a restaurant near you, grocery store maybe, something along those lines. You can kind of find that out there, and you can sort of figure out which of the Finish Long Drink varieties you want to try. The traditional comes in a blue can, got the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. The Long Drink Cranberry was the guy was drinking there a moment ago. Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail, kind of a fun category of beverage. It sort of looks like a beer because it comes in a can, but it's not. If you like mixed drinks, this is essentially a mixed drink in the can. So go to thelongdrink.com. You can find out near you where you can pick some up today. All right, as we close out the week here, let's do so with a fun collection of golden shoes. Yesterday was obviously Groundhog Day. I never did hear. Did Puxatawny Phil or Beauregard Lee or whoever your groundhog of choice is, did he see his shadow? I never heard this. Well, Chris McGowan shared this with us, and I believe it was on our Facebook page. It was shared with me. So Chris says that Kirby Smart holds his trophy aloft, and he sees his shadow, which means it's going to signal another national championship for the Georgia Bulldogs. Chris, that's very funny, very well done, certainly worthy of the golden shoe there. Coming a little bit of an unorthodox means for us, I believe, via Facebook. But nonetheless, Chris, very deserving of a golden shoe there. Very funny in light of Groundhog Day being yesterday. How about our next golden shoe to give out here? Our good friend Miriam Corbin says, if I'm ever at home for a game, which is unusual, this would definitely apply. You see the Grim Reaper showing up, and the caption at the bottom says, I'm sorry, dear, you're going to have to come back later. It's football season. The game is on. Yes. Even the Grim Reaper must take a backseat to a football season around here. Miriam will give you a golden shoe for that there as well. And then finally, one more golden shoe to give out today. Our buddy Ryan Walker sends this. I always love this meme. He says, them dogs have put Alabama in a retirement home, LOL. And you've probably seen the meme before. It's the lady walking with the walker, and she says, Bama used to win natties. And her granddaughter says, sure, Grandma, let's get you to bed, which is a very funny meme always. And in light of the suffering going on in Alabama right now, even more funny, even funnier. So Ryan Walker, well-deserved golden shoe coming your way there as well. And by the way, speaking of making fun of folks about those lousy, stinking Gators, in about 267 days from right now, Georgia beats Florida again. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We hope all of you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all that today. As I mentioned to you earlier, we're not going to go crazy long on comments today because I do have a lunch thing I'm trying to get to. So with that said, we'll read a few, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes and let y'all get your weekend started here. Let's see what else. A little Michael Vick talk in the comment section, which is not something I would have expected to see. Let's see what else. Antonio Jones checking out. Antonio, have a great weekend. Cassie Turner says Groundhog Day is my favorite holiday. Well, there you go. So did the groundhog see its shadow? I also heard this thing, I guess this has gotten publicized a little bit, that apparently Punxsutawney Phil is only right about 39% of the time, according to experts. But my question is, like, what is the definition of being right? Like, doesn't spring start the same day every way? Like, to me, this has always been the weird thing about, you're going to get an early spring. I mean, spring always starts in the same day, and it's not like warm weather comes prior to March 21st or whatever up in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's cold there until May. So how do you even, define Punxsutawney Phil being right if he calls for an early spring? It ain't going to be early in Pennsylvania. It never is. And down here, I mean, we can get spring weather in January. So I've always been a little suspicious of the whole idea that the groundhog knows what it's doing. But we also live in a day and age in which you've got like sea lions making football picks and things like that. So maybe the groundhog reading the weather is not so hard to believe. Baggins and friends, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Jim Foster Moss wondering if Nick Saban reached out to Jimbo Fisher. That's really funny. Let's see what else. Memphis Dog says, I keep getting stuck in an endless loop on Groundhog Day. Yeah, I know that feeling. Good movie, by the way. Very good movie. Crow King 123 says, the groundhog is always right, BA. That's blasphemy. Well, there you go. I apologize for that. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a minute, and we'll swing back around before we're done. Brooksy says, everybody wants to be heard on the air. Yeah, we like to try to read a lot of comments. We pride ourselves on being the most interactive show. I feel like we do a good job of that. Bob Zamblin, is this true? Now we tried to offer a Todd Monken free show. We tried to offer that. But Bob is reporting here that Todd Monken's going for a second interview with Baltimore. Is that right? I mean, as I've said, like, the one thing you can't deny is that Monken clearly has some interest in the NFL. Like, it cannot be spun that, Monken's just taking these interviews, they don't mean anything. Like, I'm assuming that Bob's got accurate info here that he's going back for Baltimore again for round 2. Like, you just can't say that. And much the same way the Tampa situation, not exactly the prettiest. If Lamar Jackson leaves, which there seems like there's a strong possibility he's leaving Baltimore, that's not the prettiest situation there either. Greg Roman just got fired, previous offensive coordinator. So it's not like it's been all that rosy of a situation there with the Ravens. So, I mean, it's fairly obvious that Monken has at least some interest in the NFL. Is it enough to actually get him to pull the trigger? I guess we'll wait and see. But once again, this is not one of those things that you can just completely write off. Joe Garliardi getting back to work. Joe, appreciate that. Thanks for being here today. B-Mac says, does the Bama 2023 class turn out like the A&M 2022 class did? Hey, I'll add to that, B-Mac. Go back and look at the Bama 2021 class, because I believe by virtue of like 24/7 composite rating, I believe the 21 class ranks ahead of Bama's 23 class in total overall score. I got news for you. A lot of those guys did not pan out. So it's not just the A&M class recently that sort of didn't quite have the feel of a true number one class. That Bama 21 class not exactly, setting records either. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. Let's see what else. On Facebook. Dog Nation's got the story on Monken. And see, we try to do a whole like Monken free show. Well, there you go. Damon Smith says no doubt he's ready to get back to the NFL. I mean, it certainly seems that way. Barry Watkins says, has UGA paid him more money? Barry, I'm of the belief that if he goes to the NFL, he'll be making less money there than he's already making at Georgia. So, I don't know that a raise alone is going to be enough here because, I think Byron Leftwich only made like $850,000 last year. Now, my guess is that Monken, if he were to go to Tampa, would make more than that. But I believe that Leftwich was making less than $1 million with the Bucks last year. So, you do have some NFL head coaches, a couple anyway, that make tons of money, but you don't have the crazy well-paid coordinators at the NFL level that you oftentimes have at the college level. Keith Fold says, I'm tired of all the Monken drama. If you want to leave, go on and do it. We're going to be fine as long as Kirby is here. I get the sentiment on that, and there's obviously a sense for all of us where some of this kind of turns into fatigue a little bit. But I would say that my patience for some of this kind of stuff is a little longer than some of y'all's is, where it's the same thing for me with the Duce Robinson thing of. I sort of feel like I have an idea of what's actually going on with the Robinson thing, and so you're sort of ready for all that to sort of play out. And in the Monken situation, as we said before, he could end all of this tomorrow if he wanted to. He could, hey, run it back, go for 3 and 23. He could put that out there on social media or whatever else. He could end this tomorrow if he wanted to. The fact that he's not doing that clearly shows you something. But I'm also just sort of okay with this playing out. I don't get super impatient about things like this. I'm like you. It's just how much longer is it going to drag out? But if it does drag out a little longer, for a guy that I think like to keep, then you sort of ride the horse through the end of the race here. So I get what you're saying, but I would say that my overall tolerance for some of these stories may be a little higher than some of y'all's is. JD Hall says he should, if he's going leave, just go ahead and go. He's causing a lot of distraction. So here's the thing, JD, and this is why my tolerance is pretty high. Do you really think he's causing a distraction? Because I don't. I really don't. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. We read you the quote the other day that Duce Robinson gave Jeff Sentell out in Arizona. Duce said, hey, I like Todd Monken. I like the way he's run the offense, but I like Georgia regardless. So it's not a distraction in the Duce Robinson recruitment based on that quote. Georgia is in a great position with Dylan Raiola right now, the 5-star quarterback for the class of 2024. It doesn't seem like Monken has much of an impact on his decision one way or another. It creates a lot of chatter among us, but ultimately this is just something we're doing for fun, right? It's hey, who would be the coordinator if Monken left or whatever else? We're talking about this in kind of water cooler type fashion, but in terms of actually being that big of a distraction for the team itself, I don't get the impression that's true at all. We're still several weeks ahead of spring practice, so by rule, it's not like Monken can be coaching right now anyway. This is Scott Sinclair's time to shine. Georgia put out a video of Sinclair the other day, putting this team through the paces. Now, so from that standpoint, I actually don't think this is a distraction. I think it's one of those things that if you're Georgia, you ought to want to keep Monken. The NFL has a slightly different timeline than college does, so I think you kind of ride this out. Is it a little bit irritating that he doesn't have more of an emotional connection to Georgia? We joked about this the other day. Monken had 1,000 chances to give you the sort of teary-eyed speech of, oh my gosh, coaching's never meant more to me than it does right here at Georgia. He didn't give you that because that's apparently just not the kind of guy that Todd Monken really is. So you'd love for Georgia to mean as much to him as it means to Kirby or as it means to, some of these other guys. You'd love for that to be the case. In Todd's case, that's apparently not true, but that doesn't mean you don't still want him. If all Monken is just a dude paid to do a job, I'm sort of okay with that because the job he does it very effectively. And I sort of hope he does this job for Georgia next season. I don't sort of hope, I definitely hope. I also think, as others have said, I think that Georgia's likely fine even if he chooses to leave. It's certainly not going to seemingly change the recruiting efforts very much, and I believe that given the talent that Georgia's going to have in place, there is certainly more than just Todd Monken who could be effective in that kind of play-calling situation. Monken is the best available candidate for the job, but if he doesn't want to be here, I believe that Georgia could probably replace him pretty effectively. But in terms of all of this being a distraction right now, I truly don't think it is. It is definitely a hot topic and fodder for those of us who are fans, but we're mostly just sort of doing this to have fun. Like, I mean, you know, I don't really think there's a lot of negativity around this here right now. All right, final comments. Steve Chaffini says it's been such a huge distraction. Will we win on G-Day? So there you go. All right, last comments. We got to get out of here. Back on YouTube for a moment. Paul Moon says, I'm not convinced that Monken wants to be a head coach. He tried his hand at that in college, but I don't know. Yeah, I really don't think all that many people have that much of a keen understanding of what Todd Monken actually wants. I just don't know. I mean, I think you got to be honest here. Like, Todd Monken has been a great offensive coordinator for Georgia, but given the nature of his personality, given his kind of, you know, sort of somewhat hands-off approach to recruiting, I don't know that Todd Monken is a super easy sell as a head coach. And I say that with all due respect as somebody who really likes Monken a lot and has certainly enjoyed having him as Georgia offensive coordinator. Hope he stays here for as long as he wants to. But the idea that he's not a college head coach right now, that may not be Monken's choice. That may be other schools' choice in terms of how easy it is to sort of sell him as the face of the program. And that is not meant to be a shot. It's not meant to be a criticism, but there is a certain sort of game you got to play to be a head coach, and I don't know that Todd Monken necessarily enjoys playing that game. Jonathan Aaron says, what are your thoughts about Michael Harris and the Braves saying the Falcons should draft Bennett? First of all, I love it when our athletes in our town are big fans of the other teams, and I mean, I like Michael Harris a lot anyway, but I love the idea that he's just a big fan of Georgia sports. So from that standpoint, I did see the quote where he said the Falcons should draft Bennett, which I just like because I like the idea that Michael Harris cares. I think it's great. I do. Origifly, thanks for being here today. I always appreciate that, and thanks for the kind words there as well. Brian Jacobs pointing out that Mike Bobo is elite at recruiting, one of the best in the country. I believe that's absolutely true. When Bobo was Georgia's offensive coordinator, you know, years ago, of anybody on the staff, he was among the very best recruiters in the entire organization. No doubt about that. Buddy Lee Z says the personnel situation in Baltimore does not seem to be favorable. I totally agree with that, Buddy Lee, and all the more reason that I guess now for the fourth consecutive day, I'll find myself saying what I've been saying, which is if you go to Tampa, you just want to really be in the NFL. And if you go to Baltimore, I would say it's the same kind of deal here. That is not a great situation. I do think that John Harbaugh is a good head coach, but right now the Ravens aren't a very good team. That if you go there to be that offensive coordinator, you just really want to be in the NFL because you're taking among the worst NFL situations over the single best college situation. That may need to be all you need to know on that. But we also see a situation where, I mean, let's not forget, you know, Georgia's offensive line coach 2 years ago retired in his 50s. I mean, you know, we're in a situation right now where, you know, college football is just hard. It's just hard, and maybe Monken's kind of caught up in some of that. You know, he's not, you know, going to come out and say it, but maybe he's just kind of turned off by what college football is right now. I mean, I don't know that to be a possibility, but I guess anything could be a possibility. I mean, but, you know, he would not be the only coach to say, I mean, look at Lane Kiffin's brother, you know, I mean, we've had a lot of famous college coaches who are like, I'll go do anything in the NFL to keep from being in college football right now. There's a little bit of a brain drain from the sport here at the moment because of some of the weirdness involved in the sport. Let's see what else. G. Gray says maybe Monken wants to be a head coach in the NFL. He's 56 years old right now. Yeah, I mean, that's not obviously the youngest guy, but it's also not too old to eventually move yourself into that position either. And maybe that is the next step for him. I guess the question would be is, do you have to take the step now of being an offensive coordinator somewhere as a way of getting into that spot if that's indeed what you want to be? I just don't know. Donnie Wilkerson predicts that Monken will still stay in Athens. You could very well be right about that. But, you know, the one thing I can't do, though, is to have, you know, it said, you know, that these interviews that he's taken, multiple teams, now multiple interviews reportedly with the Ravens, that all of this is just completely meaningless and it's got nothing to do with his future at all. I can't buy that as an idea. He is at least considering this. And while Donnie may turn out to be correct, and Donnie's obviously a great commenter, I really don't want to listen to anybody's prediction on Monken right now, because I honestly don't think anybody is all that close to Monken to really know truly what he wants to do. That's my assumption here anyway. Javier Zavala says, what's the date on Monken to make his decision? I don't know. I mean, I don't follow the NFL all that closely. Like, how late do they go in filling these coordinator jobs? It would seem by like shortly after the Super Bowl, most of that stuff is kind of done, right? Because, post Super Bowl, you move pretty quickly into free agency, and then you move pretty quickly into draft stuff after that. That sort of week or two right after the Super Bowl is kind of the end of all this, right? So we may have 2 or 3 more weeks left of this, maybe. All right, last comments. Phil Rogers says go for 3 and 23. Love that, of course. Pete Williams and Keith Foltz talking about life being easier in the NFL. He says, don't forget, you might want to ask Matt Rule about that. Yeah, Matt Rule apparently didn't enjoy his NFL time too much. Let's see what else. Travis McCullough says Lamar Jackson could hold out, not play under the franchise tag. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it certainly seems like, they're going to franchise him, I guess, right? But it sounds like they may be looking to shop him. Like, he could end up down here, right? Like I said, I follow this stuff about halfway, but it seems like there's a chance he ends up here. Richard D is on the subject of Schumann and Muschamp still sharing the defensive coordinator role. I believe that is still the case, yes. I believe that's still the case. Let's see what else. Anything else before we go? Johnny Surf Dog says he's loving right now how awful everything is down in Gainesville after Jaden Rashada went to Arizona State. Yeah, that's pretty funny stuff. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Good stuff. Randy Hall says you got to be prepared to lose up to 3 assistant coaches maybe next year. Yeah, listen, you're not going to keep all these guys forever, because you better believe the success that we are enjoying them having at UGA, everybody else is noticing as well. And, eventually, guys are going to get huge job offers. There's just no doubt that that's part of the price of doing it when you're as successful as Georgia is. That is coming your way here in the very near future. No doubt about that. All right, we got to go. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. I read about that sports gambling thing. See how real this is. As I said before, it seems weird to me that you could make this a law without having to vote on it. That seems weird to me. That's not a political opinion, honestly. I don't have an opinion on this right now necessarily. But it seems like you'd probably have to vote on that. But I don't know. Maybe you don't. But anyway, that's worth following if you're out there on that. Also, our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You want to stay nice, toasty, and warm here the rest of this winter? Well, go ahead and get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh spec. With our friends at RS Andrews, it only costs $99. You can find them online, rsandrews.com, for more on that. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will talk to you then.